I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing so good. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you making the time.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to get into this conversation and all things and everything related to what I like to refer to as liberation. So,
So where are you calling in from today, by the way?
yeah, so I live in a little city outside of Los Angeles. And I pretty much it's getting very hot and it's very sunny here today. It's the first day of summer and we're definitely feeling it. So,
Yeah, I feel you. I just left LA, so
oh,
I was
cool.
there just last week. That's where I'm from, actually.
Okay, fantastic. Where are you now?
Now I'm in New York. I left the day that the
Oh, okay.
smog came in, or the smoke rather, the Blade Runner smoke, and then I got to come
Yeah.
back. Well, here we are.
Oh, awesome, awesome.
Yeah. So let's go on the journey. We got 30 minutes here. So just a couple like highlights here. So your podcast also was Apple Spotlight pick for this month as well.
It
So
was.
kudos to you. That's so awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you
thank
are
you.
joined by your co-host Jordan Daniels.
Hmm.
And so the podcast, also known as BFF, which I love a double entendre, was named one of the top Black podcasts to listen to by Essence. So what
Yeah.
inspired you to launch this podcast? We mentioned a bit that iHeart got involved. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that process. I'm sure you had that idea before you were approached by them. So let me know.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I've been throwing all of these different ideas around about how to kind of make a splash in terms of being able to uplift the voices of marginalized people for years. And I had initially kind of started working on so I always like to say this, there's always so much beauty that comes out of an idea. And so I would say probably back in 2017, shout out to Lambda Literary. I did the Lambda Literary Writing Retreat. A lot for folks who are watching that don't know what Lambda Literary is. Lambda Literary has different tracks for different writers and for different individuals who are interested in either writing a book or writing a film or writing a play. And so I had did that, and I initially had started kind of working on a proposal for a book where I was talking very openly in the book about my own lived experience as a Black, queer, non-binary, fat, whatever, basically just a very personal kind of memoir-esque kind of idea. And I had kind of put it away, and I would say fast forward 2020, 2021 starts to roll around, and I'm kind of getting this itch to want to do something with this book. And so I have a friend tap me, and she says, "Hey, we're doing this thing over at iHeart. Would you be interested in pitching? I only learned about it a week before it closed. So this is the other thing that I would love to tell people who are watching. Never count yourself out on something. I initially was like, oh, they're never going to be interested in it. I don't have enough time to put anything together. My friend said, I believe in the idea. I think it's a great idea. You should submit it. I did it. And I would say a couple of months later, I found out I got into the program after interviews and things. And where the idea for Black Fat Femme really came from, specifically for the memoir, and it's definitely taken its own different changes throughout the years. But I will say it really started with I shared in the proposal that when I was in college, the first guy that I had ever told that I was interested in basically told me that he wasn't into Black guys or into fat guys, right? And then as kind of I started getting onto the apps, I started seeing no Black, no fat, no femme being kind of this very prominent thing I was seeing on the apps. And so, kind of as a way to reclaim that and to celebrate this idea of me loving who I am. And after years of seeing this moniker, no Black, no fat, no femmes, if you listen to the podcast and you go back to episode 1, the title is Yes Black, Yes Fat, Yes Femme. It's this notion of me being able to celebrate who I am and where I've been and where I've come from and where I am now. And so that's really what the show is. It's just this really big celebration, and I say big with all puns intended. It's a joy. it's a joyful time of me and my best friend being on the mic talking about who we are, what we've been through, and how we continue to keep going even with all of the things that life throws at us. So,
oh my gosh, that's so amazing. I love the detail about it was a week out, and you're like, no way, and then it happens, and look where you are now, and it's really inspiring to be like, oh, I have like perfectionist syndrome, which can also be paralyzing. So I don't do things sometimes because
right.
right? But it's like you had already done so much work and research with your book and your story and your experience and who you are. It's like you were enough, and your
Yeah.
friends believed in you, and then it was like, boom, here it is a few months later.
Yeah.
Love that.
And I want to add this too, like even during the process of being with Next Up, there were moments where I was like, I don't like the title of the show. I don't like this idea. I don't think it's going to really do anything or it's going to go anywhere. And now almost a year to the day later, not only are we being spotlighted, but we've stories from like, there was a place in just recently in Australia that highlighted the show. And there have been people that have reached out to me from, different parts of Asia that has said, oh my God, I feel seen, I see myself. And so it's really affirming to think that something that I wouldn't say it wasn't that I didn't believe in it. It's just, I know my experience as a Black fat femme, right? I know how the world treats me. I know how the world responds to me. And I was worried that it was only going to open up more doors, to that experience per se. And it's absolutely been the opposite. And I'm just so grateful to be able to say that I'm a part of the journey with this show.
I love that. And I love how you
Yeah.
mentioned like reclaiming that. And, I feel like there's like other words in our, queer community that we like have reclaimed, like even queer, like that was growing up in
Right.
the 90s, someone calling me that was like, oh no, like terrible. And now it's
Yeah.
like on our umbrella flag, it's like part of our
Yeah.
So I love that you're, that's part of the journey for you. And thanks for letting us in and like letting us know, like, you're like, ooh, I don't know if this title's okay. Like, I don't know if you're
Yeah.
ready. Yeah, that's really fascinating. So
Mhm.
I also love too that you said like Jordan Daniels, one of your best friends, I was listening to one of your most recent episodes, and it really is like you can tell that you have this this affinity for each other, this love for each other, where you can just like cackle and tell jokes, and you were like talking about Janet Jackson, like all this fun.
Yeah.
But then you're like getting into it later about like gatekeeping and messaging, and like this, it really does like span the gamut episode.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
imagine that's like, so you have someone that you trust that you're doing that with, but then you're also bringing in guests. And what is that like when you have someone on the show that maybe you don't know? And what is that energy like? What is that shift?
Yeah. So, and that's the interesting part. So a lot of the folks that we have on the show, it's a roll of the dice in terms of how is the energy going to be in the show? Are they going to understand the show? Are they going to understand the dynamic that me and Jordan have? And I mean, that's the other thing about the show too. It's like, I think having another Black fat femme person who gets it, right? Who just really genuinely, you don't have to over explain, you don't have to. And that's kind of what we try to do with the guests. We try to make sure that our producers that, say, hey, we think that this person would be a great fit for this show. We bring them in with the notion of, we hope that they have an understanding of what it's like to not only be just, Black, but also the part about, dealing with your weight, or the part of dealing with, how much of yourself do you put out in the world. And I think that's the thing that makes some of the guests so fun, is that they get it, right? You don't have to spend time, like for instance, having Amber Abundance on the other week was one of the, in my opinion, one of the most I want to I want to say consoling, but it's not really, that's not the word I want to use. It was a breath of fresh air to have someone on the show who was reiterating and sharing their own experience, but also at the same time validating our experience too. And so that's what a lot of it has been. It has been guests coming on and us seeing them from afar, having their own lights and having their own joy and having their own experience, in terms of who they are with identity, and then bringing that to the mic, and reminding people to share theirs too. And I think that's the thing I think is so important and so imperative, is that I think the world, especially right now, right, we see all of these bans coming up, and we see all of these different ways that the world is trying to silence folks, getting rid of books and, taking things down or going after people for sharing things. I think having a show where people can tune in every Tuesday to be able to say, this is my safe haven, even for just an hour, that is something that I feel like is a true blessing. And it's a reminder for other folks too, to create those safe havens for them, especially in a world where we often don't find them or we don't get them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned part of your ethos of the show is being unapologetically loving yourself. And I'm
Right.
curious, what does that mean for you now? Has that changed over time? Was it different maybe 10 years ago versus now being like front facing with people listening
Yeah.
to what you have to say?
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting when I get questions like this because I think people think I just rolled out of bed and I was like, I love being Black, I love being fat, I love being femme. And it's like, no, girl, this has been a very, very steep journey.
Mm.
And when I say steep, it's been a lot of therapy, it's been a lot of tears, it's been a lot of, why me? I think I used to feel that way a lot as a child. Why did I get out of all the things that the world could have given me, why did I get this to carry? And I literally for years thought of it as something that was a burden, and I hated it. I hated not only the intersectional experience of having to deal with the oppression that came with being Black, but I also hated the intersectional experience about feeling like I had to constantly shrink myself, both in size, but also in terms of my personality, in order for the world to kind of digest me. And that's the thing, kind of going back to not only just the show, but everything that I do. I find that a lot of the folks that find me, or a lot of the folks that say, hey, Dr. Higgins, you should come in here and work with this on us, they love me in full, I would say in fullness, right? In this idea that I don't have to shrink myself. And so it has been a lot of work and it has been hard, but I definitely find that there is so much peace in really understanding that I was given this because I guess the universe felt like I was the perfect person to handle it. And looking at it as it's a very heavy burden, but oftentimes the world doesn't give the easiest things to those who can't handle it, right? And so every day I have to remind myself, like even today I had a moment where something had happened and I just was like, oh, I'm so sick of dealing with this. And then I had to remind myself, well, again, this is just another part of your journey that you'll be able to look back on and smile when this is said and done and it's all over, right? And so I think that that's been the biggest thing. I hope I answered your question, but I think for me, I know a lot of people hate hearing it's a journey. It really is. It really is a journey. And I think, it's very cliche to say that self-love is something you have to work on. But I think it is something that every day I have to remind myself that, you know, a part of who I am and a part of who I'm becoming is me being able to not only just share my story, but also being able to see how other people see me and learn from me and watch me as they find themselves in the process too. So it's a gift and a curse, and it's a very heavy one. But I often say that, again, the universe doesn't give you what you can't handle. And so I'm just very grateful that I guess this is a part of my journey, and it'll be a part of my legacy as well.
I think that's beautiful. You did answer my question. It's so great. It's just like, it's a very holistic, I believe, approach or outlook on this.
Mhm.
I appreciate too that you mention therapy and doing that work for yourself. Like I'm a big believer in therapy, so it's helped me. Like my unworthiness is like always
Mhm.
in the back. And it's just like you have,
Mhm.
it's like that's what I have to check and like my personal part. And it's like, oh, you don't have a right to speak because you're walking in a place of privilege as being a white thin person, right? Like could be part
Mhm.
of the conversation. Like, who am I to have this conversation with Dr. John Paul? It's like, and my own biases about myself show up in my conversations. And it's like, okay, I can hear that voice. I can acknowledge it. And also the universe just put us together to have this conversation, and I
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
be the best person I can be and like do my
Mhm.
research and like have a wonderful conversation with another wonderful
Yeah.
human. Here we are on the journey. Maybe
Yeah.
actually the perfect person to talk to you right now. Like those
Right.
framings like you were just doing is so beautiful and inspiring. So I think, and like you said, it's like it takes practice. It's like an
Mm.
daily, multiple times a day practice of like
Mhm.
framing my thinking to like know that I am where I am supposed to be.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd love to hear about you know, you mentioned, so you're a doctor. So tell me about being a doctor, an educator. Like, how has that part of your, sorry everyone, that part of your journey been like, how does that inform what you do with BFF and your podcast and the way you approach
Yeah.
topics and talk to people?
Yeah. So, I think it's imperative that I name, so a big part of kind of where I come from in all of my work, whether it be my writing, I've written several articles that people reference, and I've written in books, I've written, my dissertation. Oftentimes people will pull it and will oftentimes reference it. And a big part of it comes from the idea of Kimberly Crenshaw's concept of intersectionality. And I think it's imperative that I name, not only is she a Black woman, but she's a Black woman who is naming the ways that systems of oppression work. And so I think for me, in my show, if you look at the banner and you kind of go back to Black Fat Femme as a concept, our thing you'll hear is, or even if you hear the promos on your when you're listening to podcast, we say where the intersections of identity are celebrated. And so I think that that's kind of how both of them kind of came to be, right? It was this notion of knowing of how oppression works, understanding how oppression moves, understanding how the system itself manifests, right? But then really kind of saying, okay, now that I know what it's doing and how it's doing, now I know how to move around it, right? And I think that that's what Black Fat Femme is, I've said in so many, we've had, this week we launched, episode 52, and I have said in so many of the different episodes, right? I think this is really, not only is it a love letter to other Black, queer, fat, femme, non-binary people, but it really is kind of if you listen to it, it's kind of like Audre Lorde's work in the sense that it's a blueprint to really being able to understand who you are, what you've been through, why you've been through it, and then really thinking about how can I pick out the things about these really terrible things that have happened to me and celebrate them, right? And I tell people every day, and I've said this in so many different facets, I know when I wake up every day that I'm everything that the world hates. I'm Black, I'm fat, I'm femme, and on top of that, I'm very happy about being that, and I'm loud about it, right? And so I think because I'm so boisterous, I should say, about who I am, I know that there are things that come my way that aren't so, savory or aren't so sweet, but at the same time, there are things that I can pick out of that. And I can say, I always like to say too, people oftentimes think they're laughing at me, but I always end up with the last laugh. And I think that's the beautiful thing of it, right? I can sit here and I can really sit with how these systems of oppression have impacted me, but at the same time, I recognize that I am the one that is I always end up the victor, right? And I think about this too. You take away my rights, God forbid something happens to me and I'm no longer here on this earth, I still have a legacy that people can quote. I still have something that I've left behind that people can listen to, right? And so I think about that often, right? Like it is so easy to sit and say, oh my gosh, this world is hard. This world is mean to me. This world has given me nothing to work with. But the one thing about being Black that I love is that I've been able to make a lot of something out of nothing. And that's in my DNA. That is in my history. That is literally what what the enslaved folks in the dyads of my identity have done, right? They've made a lot of something out of nothing. And so I feel like I'm just continuing where they left off.
That is so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to hear, so you're talking about your identity and your ancestry, so some of those stories, ancestors that of yours, they didn't get to tell those stories. So
Yep.
now you have a platform and an audience where you get to
Mm-hmm.
share these stories. Are there stories that were, I don't know, maybe challenging for you or surprising to yourself that you were revealing on such a wide scale? And how were they received?
Yeah, so I think, I go back to like episode number, I think it's like 7 or 8, where me and Joe are talking about, the episode's called A Family Affair. I think for me, just having conversations about family, right? Having conversations about leaving a religion where my entire family is a part of that religion. They are still part of that religion. And oftentimes they have excluded me in different things because of that said religion, right? And so I think about that a lot, like sharing anything about family, sharing anything about my upbringing. It can be hard, but it's really cool when you get people who say, oh, I was a part of this, religion too, and I opted to leave because I wanted to find myself. And now I'm happy that I've left. And this is how you're helping me get through these thoughts that I have. So, at the end of the day, there are times where you're talking about family is hard, talking about being fat in a world where every day, and even having the conversation we had this week's episode is about fat phobia, right? Putting it out there that these are the things that I have done or I thought about doing to change myself to adhere to the way that society wants me to show up. It's really tough. It can be very hard to open up about that, but I think what it really comes down to is knowing that when I'm honest about my experience, I'm giving agency for other people to be honest about theirs. And I think that's the thing I wish, and I always say that like everything I do is not, everyone thinks that, oh, Dr. John Paul, people celebrate that, but I often say a lot of what I'm doing is for the me that didn't have this, right? Like if I was 15 or 16 and I saw Andre Leon Talley talking openly about him being happy that he was a fat person, that probably would have made me so much more happier while I was a teenager. And so that's really what I'm trying to do with my work, is I'm just trying to literally give folks what I didn't have and be the beacon of light that I oftentimes needed.
So beautiful. And I'm curious, like what, so, you're speaking about earlier about like what, like you're, by doing this, you're reaching out to that younger self that you didn't have. Now there's these younger folks that are hearing you. And you were speaking about earlier, the liberation for Black, queer, fat, non-binary people. So now that there's more people that the young folks can listen to and see and identify with, what does that liberation look like today in today's society? Now that there are things, but we're also up against, as we know, a lot of challenges.
We are. And I've said, I say this on the show often, these challenges are never going to go away, right? As long as there are people who want to maintain power, as long as there are people who understand and know their privilege and know what their privilege affords them, we're probably never going to see the change that we really want to see. But I think that there's something to be said to say that even though these systems continue to keep manifesting and they keep continuing to quote unquote win, there is still something so powerful about someone finding their voice. And I think that's what I've been able to do in the last 5 to 6 years, right? That's what I've really been able to do with this microphone, right? When you have a company as big as Apple that is saying, we love the work that you're doing, it's like, aha, I found my voice. And I think that that's the thing. I think, if anything, right, it's so easy to feel like, well, I don't want people coming after me. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want my family to turn the other way. So I'm just going to sit here and be quiet and be myself. But then at the same time, it's like, what does that really truly afford you? Right. And so I always like to say, one of the things that a lot of the monikers that people kind of know me by is, I may not be everyone's cup of tea, but drink some water. You'll be all right. I am a true believer in this notion that I may not be for everybody, and that's okay. I may not be for white people. I may not be for Latinx people. I may not be for Asian people. But the one thing that I am going to do is I'm going to be Black, and I'm going to be fat, and I'm going to be queer. And that is the thing that's just who I am. And if folks gravitate towards that, I want to give them the agency to say, you get to be that too. The notion of, oh, you're too much. Your personality is so big. I'm sorry, sis. Like, I'm not going to dim my light for you to feel bigger or for you to feel greater. And that's what I feel like I do in everything I write and everything that I speak about, in all of the events that I have done, and including this one. Like, I think the world would be so much better if we just walked and we stood in our truth. And I think that's what I'm trying to emulate in a way, right? And yes, people could say, well, it's easy for you to do that because now you're capitalizing on it. Okay, right? I got to eat too. But I think at the same time, I've been able to create a career out of speaking truth to power. And that's what I'm trying to encourage other people to do too. If there's something in your life that makes you feel like you can't speak truth to power about who you truly are, you have the right to change that. You have the right to own that. And I know, I get this all the time. Oh, well, what about the youth who are living in homes and living with families who are not supportive of them? Your time is going to come. Like, they say, oh, it's going to get better. It may not get better. It may not get better at all, right? But I will say that there is going to come a time where you will be okay, right? Even if it's not getting better, you will be okay. And I think that's the thing I'm really trying to show with what I do.
Yeah. Wow. We are going to church today. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. I love it. Okay. We have 5 minutes left and a couple audience questions. The audience questions are lighting up right now. So let's take a few. So someone asked, how can the entertainment industry create more inclusive spaces and opportunities for individuals who have been historically underrepresented?
Pay them. I think that's the thing I've been saying, and I will continue to keep saying. I think the writer's strike is a great example of what we're dealing with. You have a lot of marginalized people who, and it's interesting. It's been really cool because having friends who are in the industry that I can have these conversations with have helped enlighten me on things. I think what ends up happening is where people are saying, well, there's no space, there's no room. There are no Black and brown people in the room. Well, the Black and brown people who are in the room don't have the means, don't have the funds, don't have the resources to bring more Black and brown people into the room. So if they had the resources, if they had the space, then they could. And so I think that that's one of the things that the industry can do is, those who are in positions of power who can change things. I'm currently APing a show right now, and it's been really cool that the individual who brought me in saw the opportunity to bring me in, and he did. And I think that's also a big part too, right? If you can change it in any way, in any shape or any form, do that. Like if you have an opportunity to bring in someone who is less, quote unquote, who's sitting with depression or dealing with, an oppressed system, give them the opportunity, give them the key, open that door. But also too, pay them and pay them well. That's the thing that I'm gonna always say.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, a couple minutes left. What advice would you give to folks that are maybe not part of the Black, queer, fat, non-binary communities? How can these allies, show up as allies? How can they help?
Yeah. So I think this is a great way to kind of close the conversation. I think, and again, if you listen to the show, I'm going to keep plugging it. Listen to the show weekly. Every Tuesday we drop a new episode, and we're going to be talking about that in the upcoming episodes. I think it's imperative for people to know that we are not in a place right now where we need someone to understand our experience. That's cool. I get that you understand that I'm Black, fat, and femme, but what I need is for you to do something, right? So to the family members who are saying racist things and you're like, oh, I'm too afraid to say anything because that's my mom and that's my dad, that's just who they are. Say something, right? To the friends who have partners who are racist or make racist jokes, right? Let them know, like, hey, the people I love are Black, brown, queer, fat, whatever. I don't appreciate you saying that, right? Like, say something, do something. And if and I recognize that all of us have the same will or the same power, or sometimes we may mess up in the process of trying to be an accomplice to the experiences of marginalized people. But I also want to encourage folks to mess up, right? The only way I can fight for my trans brothers, sisters, ladies, gentle limbs, and everyone else in the community, right, is for me to learn and to mess up and to do it better the next time. And so that's the thing I'm really encouraging folks to do, right? This is not a time to just sit and feel and say, oh, I understand what you're going through. It's no, what can I do to do something about the experience that you're doing, that less than experience you're doing? And you'd be surprised. The smallest thing can have the biggest impact. And that's kind of what I've been saying for years, and I hope someone somewhere will hear it. The smallest things, simply correcting someone and saying that's not their pronouns, or hey, you may want to be careful about how you refer to certain people. You don't know their experience. That kind of stuff changes the energy in a room. It makes people more aware. It allows us all to be in a space where we can be happy about who we are. So
amazing. I agree. Perfect note to end on. Listen to BFF on all of the things. You can get it on wherever you get your podcasts. What else would you like to share with us before we wrap up? Anything we should go check out? Upcoming projects?
Yeah.
How to stay connected?
I do. I mean, I think following me on social is great. Following me again on LinkedIn. I give a lot of kind of tips about, especially for folks who are like, well, I'm an employer, or I'm on, I'm in HR and I have, queer people that I'm working with, or queer folks that I want to bring in. I don't know what to do. Definitely reach out for me, to help with that as well. But with all that being said, I'm on all the socials. I'm always posting about something, even if it's just something funny. And I recognize that there might be a tinge of like, oh, Dr. Higgins, that's a little touchy. That's just who I am by nature. Is I love to find the funny and a lot of really jacked up stuff. So yeah, that's pretty much me in a nutshell. Just find me on social.
Amazing. Well, Dr. Jonathan Higgins, DoctorJonPaul, thank you so much for making the time today. Please come back. I hope we can do this more.
Will do. All right. Take care.
All right. Take care now.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye now.